The scanner had not made a sound in 11 days. That was not unusual. At the Vorith Interstellar Enrollment Facility on the orbital platform above Kepler 442b, the biometric intake scanner, a matte gray column of compressed sensor arrays roughly the height of a Tavari adult, processed recruits in near silence. A soft chime when the scan was complete. A green light when the file transferred to intake. Nothing more. The machine had been designed that way on purpose. Recruitment was supposed to feel welcoming, not clinical. Enrollment Officer Desik Pao, a Tavari with slate blue skin and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent 14 years watching recruits shuffle through intake lines, stood at her post beside the scanner and watched the morning queue. The line curved through the holding bay and out into the connecting corridor, 487 cadets from 11 different species, all of them here to begin the first phase of assessment for the Galactic Coalition Defense Initiative. She had processed 512 cadets in the past 11 days. The scanner had chimed 512 times. Green light, 512 times. File transferred, 512 times. No alerts. No flags. No anomalies. The GCDI scanner was not a simple camera. It did not merely photograph a face and assign a number. The intake column used layered biometric resonance imaging, mapping cardiovascular rhythms, neural oscillation patterns, bone density variance, metabolic baseline, and a dozen other physiological markers simultaneously. It could identify a recruit with 99.97% certainty even if they had undergone significant cosmetic alteration. It had been in use across 38 coalition worlds for over 2 decades. In those 2 decades, the scanner had triggered a red alert exactly 4 times. 3 of those had been equipment malfunctions. The 4th had been a genuine security incident. A Dravari nationalist who had surgically altered 2 of his cranial ridges and coated his resonance signature with a commercial dampener purchased illegally from a black market vendor on the outer rim. The alert had flagged him in 0.4 seconds. Desik remembered reading about that case in her training documentation. She had thought, at the time, that the precision was almost unsettling. The queue moved steadily through the morning. A Sorokin female, tall, pale-scaled, with the quiet dignity common to her species, stepped onto the scanner pad and stood still while the blue sweep of light passed over her from floor to shoulder. Chom. Green light. File transferred. The Sorokin stepped off and moved toward the secondary documentation station without a word. A breathic pair came through together, were separated politely by the attendant droid, and scanned one at a time. Chime chime. Green green. 3 Tavari young males came through in succession, still wearing civilian clothes, still looking slightly overwhelmed by the scale of the facility. Desik gave them a small nod as they passed. She had been where they were once. It seemed a long time ago. Then came the Dravari contingent, 19 of them, part of a diplomatic recruitment initiative that the coalition had been quietly proud of. The Dravari were not natural allies. Their homeworld had spent 2 centuries in careful isolation before the treaties, and even now their integration into coalition institutions was fragile. Sending 19 young Dravari to an enrollment facility was considered a minor political achievement by the people who tracked such things. The 19 moved through the scanner one by one, each standing with the rigid posture their culture demanded in formal settings. Chom, chom, chom. 19 green lights. Desik logged each transfer with practiced efficiency. She was on the last of her morning intake reports when she noticed the next recruit approaching the scanner pad. She almost did not look up. She was glad she did. The recruit was human, which was not unusual. Humans had been part of the coalition for 61 years and showed up in enrollment queues across dozens of facilities. What made Desik look was not the species but the posture. The recruit walked with an unhurried, easy confidence that was different from the practiced stillness of the Sorokin or the rigid formality of the Dravari. It was the kind of walk that did not announce itself. Just someone moving through a space like they had already decided what they were going to do next. Mel. Dark-complexioned. Mid-20s by human aging standards. He wore the standard-issue pre-enrollment civilian coverall, same as every other recruit in the queue. His file on Desik's screen listed him as cadet applicant Marcus Reyes, age 26, homeworld Earth, Sol system, prior service unspecified. He stepped onto the scanner pad. The blue light swept up. And then, for the first time in 11 days and 512 scans, on a machine that had been engineered to stay quiet, every alarm in the scanner column fired at once. Not a chime. Not a soft alert tone. A full red band resonance alarm, broadcasting on the security frequency, loud enough to freeze every person in the holding bay. Desik's hand was on the emergency contact panel before she had consciously decided to move. The red alert lasted exactly 9 seconds before the system automatically downgraded to a yellow band advisory. Those 9 seconds were enough. The holding bay went still in the way that large spaces sometimes do when something happens that nobody has a script for. Recruits stopped mid-step. The attendant droids pivoted in unison toward the scanner column. The 2 coalition security officers posted at the bay's north exit moved forward without being asked, hands not quite at their sidearms but not far from them either. Marcus Reyes stood on the scanner pad and did not move. His expression, Desic noted as she crossed toward him, was not fear. It was the particular kind of careful stillness that people adopted when they understood that any sudden movement would be interpreted as a threat. He had his hands slightly away from his sides, palms forward. Not raised in surrender, just visible. Unambiguous. Someone who knew how to behave when weapons might be nearby. That observation went into a corner of Desic's mind to be examined later. "Cadet Applicant Reyes," she said, keeping her voice even. "Please step off the pad and come with me." He stepped off. He came with her. He did not ask what was happening, which was, in Desic's experience, either the response of someone with a very calm temperament or someone who already knew more than they were saying. She led him to the secondary assessment room, a small, white-walled space with a table, 3 chairs, and a secondary scanner array mounted in the ceiling. The 2 security officers followed and positioned themselves near the door. Desic sat across the table from Reyes and pulled up his file on her datapad. "I'm going to be straightforward with you," she said. "The intake scanner flagged a red band resonance alert when it processed your biometrics. That is an extremely rare event. I need to understand why." Reyes looked at her with dark eyes that were calm in a way she found difficult to read. "What does the scanner look for, exactly?" "Biometric resonance mapping. Cardiovascular rhythms, neural oscillation, bone structure, metabolic baseline. A composite profile that should be consistent with your filed identity documents. And something in my profile wasn't consistent. The alert indicates a significant anomaly. I'm not yet certain what kind." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I ask, when the alert fired, did it flag me as a security risk or as an unknown quantity?" Desic looked at her datapad. The alert classification was still processing through the secondary diagnostic system, but a preliminary category had already populated. She read it twice to make sure she had understood it correctly. Anomaly class, physiological, unknown variant. No threat correlation. Further analysis required. Unknown quantity, she said. He nodded slowly as if this confirmed something. "That's a better answer than the other one. Mr. Reyes, I need you to help me understand what the scanner might have found. Is there anything in your medical history that could produce an anomalous biometric profile? Implants, genetic therapies, significant trauma, unusual?" "Yes," he said quietly. "All of the above." Desic set her datapad down. "I'm going to need you to be more specific." What followed was 23 minutes of the most technically dense medical history Desic had ever received from a recruit. Marcus Reyes spoke carefully and precisely, like a man who had rehearsed this explanation before and still found parts of it difficult to deliver. He described 3 years of service in a human deep survey program operating beyond the official coalition frontier. He described an exposure incident, radiation and an unclassified biological agent, that had required 2 years of reconstructive medical intervention. He described bone reinforcement procedures, a cardiac regulation implant, neural recalibration therapy, and something he called metabolic rebaseline treatment that he admitted was not standard medical practice anywhere in coalition space. "Where was the treatment administered?" Desic asked. "A human facility. Off the main registry. That is going to complicate the verification process considerably." "I know. I brought documentation." He reached slowly into the interior pocket of his coverall and placed a data chip on the table. "Everything I have. Medical logs, treatment records, the survey program incident report. The program itself was classified, but the medical documentation was released to me when I mustered out." Desic picked up the chip. She turned it over in her fingers. "Mr. Reyes, most recruits who come through intake with an anomalous background simply didn't disclose something on their pre-enrollment forms. You disclosed everything." "I disclosed everything on my pre-enrollment forms," he said. "Apparently the forms don't ask the right questions." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her data pad, where the secondary diagnostic was still running. The scanner had not been wrong. It had found something. What it had found was a human body that had been subjected to nearly 4 years of intensive medical reconstruction following a near-fatal exposure event, and had emerged from that process with a physiological profile that matched no known baseline in the Coalition biometric database. The machine had screamed because it had encountered something it did not have a category for. She was beginning to understand that this was not the most alarming part of the situation. The data chip contained 4.7 gigabytes of medical records. Desic turned the review over to the facility's chief medical officer, a Sorokin named Vareth Sul who had the quiet, methodical energy of someone who had spent decades reading things that most people would find incomprehensible. Desic sat in the review room while Vareth Sul went through the files, occasionally making a soft sound that Desic had learned, over 6 years of working alongside him, meant that he had found something significant. He made that sound 11 times in the first hour. Marcus Reyes sat in the waiting annex on the other side of the wall, presumably still very calm. The incident report is genuine, Vareth Sul said eventually, setting down his secondary datapad. The authentication codes are Coalition adjacent. The survey program operated under a Coalition provisional license, which is why their documentation clears our verification protocols. The medical records are consistent with the incident described. And the treatments? The chief medical officer was quiet for a moment. The treatments are where I begin to have questions. He turned his primary datapad around so Desic could see the display. On the screen was a diagram of a human skeletal structure, overlaid with a dense web of annotation lines pointing to specific bones with long technical labels she could not entirely parse. The bone reinforcement, Vareth Sul said, was performed using a calcium polymer composite that I have not encountered in standard Coalition surgical records. The tensile strength indicated by the scanner data is approximately 40% above normal human skeletal baseline. The cardiac implant is similarly non-standard. It appears to be a rhythm regulator combined with an emergency compression assist function, which is not a combination I have seen in any approved Coalition device registry. Is it dangerous? To others? No. To him? Possibly over the long term. These are not technologies that have been through standard Coalition clinical trials, but they appear to have been administered competently, and he has clearly survived them without immediate adverse consequence. Desic thought about this. The neural recalibration therapy. Yes. Vareth Sul looked at his notes. That is the most unusual element. Neural recalibration is typically used to address trauma-induced processing disruptions, what humans sometimes call post-traumatic stress. The therapy described in his records is a longer and more intensive version of standard protocols, applied following both the original exposure trauma and the stress of the subsequent medical reconstruction period. Another pause. The effect on neural oscillation patterns, which the scanner measures as part of biometric baseline, would be to produce readings that diverge significantly from untreated human norms. Enough to trigger a red band alert. Combined with the bone density variance and the cardiac implant signature? Yes. Easily. Desic sat with this for a moment. The holding bay outside had returned to normal processing. The queue had moved on. 513 recruits had now passed through intake. The scanner had alarmed for one. He came here to enlist, she said. Yes. Knowing the scanner would flag him. Almost certainly. And he brought documentation. Very thorough documentation. Desic folded her hands on the table. What is your medical recommendation? Vareth Sul considered the question with the careful deliberation she had always respected in him. From a medical standpoint, he is functional. His physiological profile is anomalous, but anomalous is not the same as dangerous. The treatments appear to have been successful in their stated purpose, which was to preserve and restore function after a significant trauma event. He looked at her steadily. My recommendation is continued assessment. He is not a threat. He is a puzzle. Those are not always different things, Desic said. No, Vareth Sul agreed. But in my experience, it is worth knowing which one you have before you decide what to do about it. She went back to the waiting annex. Reyes was sitting in the same chair, in the same posture, with the same unhurried calm. There was a cup of water on the table in front of him that one of the attendant droids must have brought. He had drunk about half of it. Your documentation has cleared preliminary medical review, Desic said. Good. You are going to need to undergo an extended secondary assessment before we can proceed with your enrollment application. Several departments will want to review your file. I expected that. She sat down across from him. This was not standard intake protocol. Enrollment officers did not typically sit with flagged recruits during the review period. But something about the situation felt like it warranted a different approach. Mr. Reyes, she said, when you applied for enrollment, You listed your motivation for joining the GCDI as continued service. Can you tell me what that means to you? He turned the water cup slowly in his hands, looking at it rather than at her. I spent 3 years past the frontier, in places where the coalition's reach doesn't quite extend. You see things out there that don't make it into the official reports. He looked up. I came back different. That's just the truth. But I came back. Pause. I'd like to be useful. It was not a dramatic answer. It was not the kind of answer that made for a good recruitment poster. It was the kind of answer that came from someone who had already spent a long time thinking about why they were here and had reduced it down to the simplest honest version. Desic made a note in his file. The extended review took 4 days. In those 4 days, Marcus Reyes's file was examined by the Medical Assessment Division, the Identity Verification Bureau, the Coalition Security Analytical Unit, and, which was unusual enough to prompt a quiet conversation between Desic and her supervisor, the GCDI's Strategic Aptitude Research Office. The first 3 departments behaved approximately as expected. Medical Assessment ran 17 additional diagnostic tests and produced a report that used the word unprecedented 6 times in 40 pages. Identity Verification cross-referenced his documentation against every accessible database and found no discrepancies, though they noted in their final report that the survey program he had served with operated in a records gray area that made complete verification inherently limited. Coalition Security flagged his case for passive monitoring, standard procedure for any recruit whose intake process had involved a red band alert, and ultimately assigned him a clearance classification that was 3 levels below his previous survey program clearance, which Desic suspected he found mildly frustrating, though he did not say so. The Strategic Aptitude Research Office was a different matter. SARO was a small department. It occupied a 3-room suite near the top of the facility's administrative section and was staffed by 7 researchers whose job, as best Desic had ever understood it, was to identify recruits with unusual combinations of skills and route them toward programs that could make use of those combinations. Most recruits never interacted with SARO. The office processed perhaps 2 or 3 cases per enrollment cycle. Reyes was called to a SARO interview on the 3rd day of his review. Desic was not present for the interview. She was not cleared for SARO proceedings. What she knew of it came from the summary note that appeared in Reyes's file afterward, authored by the office's senior researcher, a Tavari named Osik Drahan, who Desic had met at a facility function once and found quietly intimidating. The note read, "Applicant demonstrates exceptional adaptive reasoning under uncertainty, high tolerance for ambiguous operational contexts, and a physiological resilience profile that, while anomalous by standard metrics, represents a potentially significant operational asset in non-standard deployment environments. His prior experience in frontier survey operations provides a practical foundation rarely seen in applicants at this enrollment stage. SARO recommendation: advance to full enrollment with priority routing to advanced assessment track. Case to be reviewed at senior GCDI level." Desic read the note twice. Senior GCDI level review was not something that happened at enrollment facilities. Senior GCDI level was the command structure 2 tiers above this entire platform. She sent a query to her supervisor. Her supervisor sent back a response that said, essentially, that this was above her pay grade and to please continue normal processing of the remaining enrollment queue. On the 4th day, Desic was present when Reyes was informed of the decision on his application. She had not planned to be there, it was not her role in this stage, but she had found a reason to be near the administrative corridor when the notification was delivered, which she acknowledged to herself was a mildly unprofessional impulse that she did not particularly regret. The enrollment officer who delivered the notification was a junior colleague named Ferris, who read from the official template in the slightly mechanical way that junior officers sometimes did when they were not sure how to handle a situation that had moved outside normal parameters. Cadet applicant Reyes, following extended biometric assessment and multi-department review, your enrollment application has been approved. You have been assigned to Advanced Assessment Track 7. Reporting time is 0600 local standard, 2 days from today. Quarters assignment will be transmitted to your comm unit within the hour. Reyes received this information with the same composure he had maintained throughout the 4 days. He thanked Ferris quietly. Then, as he was turning to leave, he glanced down the corridor and saw Desic standing there. He stopped. "Officer Powell," he said. "Mr. Reyes." A brief silence. She was not sure what she had expected. Perhaps something clarifying, some detail that would make sense of the past 4 days in a neat and satisfying way. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being straightforward with me." "It seemed warranted," she said. He nodded once and walked away down the corridor with that same unhurried, easy stride. Desic stood there for a moment longer. Then she went back to the holding bay where the morning queue had already begun, and took her position beside the scanner column. Chomp. Green light. File transferred. Chomp. Green light. File transferred. The machine was quiet again. Advanced Assessment Track 7 was housed in a section of the facility that most recruits never saw. It occupied the lower administrative deck, below the holding bays, below the medical division, below the dormitory blocks. The corridor that led to it was unmarked except for a small alphanumeric plate beside the door, and the door itself required a clearance code that had been transmitted to Reyes's comm unit along with his quarters assignment. He arrived at 0558. 2 minutes early. The room inside was larger than he had expected. It was configured as a seminar space rather than a barracks or training floor, a curved arrangement of desks facing a central presentation area, with screens on the walls and what appeared to be a high-resolution tactical display table at the center. The lighting was good. The air recycling was quieter than on the upper decks. There were 6 other people in the room. Reyes took a seat and looked at the others without making it obvious that he was doing so, which was a habit left over from 3 years of operating in environments where reading a room quickly was a functional necessity. The group was diverse in the way that coalition facilities tended to be: 2 Tavari, 1 Sorokin female, 1 Breathic male whose cranial ridge pattern suggested he was from the northern clans, 1 human female who had the bearing of someone with prior military service, and 1 species Reyes did not immediately recognize. Small, gray-skinned, with eyes that were large and dark and watching everything. 7 recruits. Track 7. He did not think that was a coincidence. At 0600 exactly, the door opened and a Tavari male in a senior officer's uniform entered the room. He was older, silver-streaked along his temple ridges, with the deliberate movements of someone accustomed to being listened to. He set a data pad on the presentation table and looked around the room at each of them in turn without speaking for a moment. "You were each enrolled through a standard intake process," he said finally. "You were each flagged, by the biometric scanner, by secondary review, or by department referral, as presenting characteristics outside normal enrollment parameters. You are here because those characteristics are considered, on balance, to be assets rather than liabilities." Pause. Track 7 is not a standard assessment track. It is an accelerated evaluation program for recruits whose profiles suggest potential for non-standard operational roles within the GCDI's Frontier and Deep Survey divisions. Reyes kept his expression neutral. He had wondered. You will spend the next 6 weeks in assessment. Physical, cognitive, operational. The evaluations are not competitive. You are not being ranked against each other. You are being evaluated against the operational requirements of specific program types that have been pre-identified as potential fits for your profiles. The officer's gaze moved to Reyes for a moment, just briefly, just a beat longer than it had stayed on anyone else. Some of you, the officer continued, have prior experience in environments similar to those you may be assigned to. That experience is part of why you are here. It is also something that will be examined carefully, because experience in frontier environments is not always an uncomplicated thing to carry. The Sorokin female shifted slightly in her seat. The human woman across the curve of desks had a very still face that told Reyes she was feeling something she was choosing not to show. He understood both responses. Questions? The officer asked. There were none. Not yet. Questions would come later, when people had had time to think about what they had heard and decide which questions were worth asking in a room full of strangers. The officer nodded. Day 1 begins in 30 minutes. Breakfast is available in the anteroom. I recommend eating. He picked up his datapad. My name is Commander Resh Tov. You can come to me with concerns. I will answer what I am able to answer. He moved toward the door then paused. One more thing. The fact that the scanner found something unusual in each of you does not mean you are unusual in a way that requires apology or explanation. The scanner measures against a baseline. The baseline was designed around a fairly narrow definition of what a recruit is supposed to look like. He looked around the room one more time. Track 7 exists in part because that definition has consistently proven to be too narrow. He left. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the breathic male across the desk arrangement exhaled slowly and said, in coalition standard with a strong Northern Clan accent, "So, breakfast." Reyes almost smiled. The 6 weeks were not easy. They were not designed to be easy, but that was almost beside the point. Track 7's assessment program was constructed not to break recruits but to understand them, to find the edges of what each person could sustain, could reason through, could hold together under conditions that systematically removed the comfortable certainties that most operational training relied on. Day 4 was a 72-hour isolation exercise in which each recruit was given a set of incomplete information about a simulated crisis scenario and asked to make decisions without access to additional resources. The scenario changed every 6 hours. The information remained incomplete throughout. Reyes slept 4 hours over the 72. This was not because he was trying to demonstrate endurance, it was because the problems kept evolving and stopping felt wrong. When Commander Tove reviewed his decision logs afterward, the assessment notation read, "Consistent strategic coherence maintained under sustained uncertainty. Sleep deprivation impact within acceptable performance margins. Notable, subject demonstrates markedly lower cortisol response to informational ambiguity than baseline projections for humans predicted." The medical note attached to that assessment, which Reyes was not shown until much later, added, "Consistent with post-neural recalibration anxiety response profile documented in intake records. The therapy appears to have produced a durable recalibration of stress response thresholds. Long-term implications unclear but short-term operational benefit is evident." Week 3 brought physical assessments that Reyes had been both anticipating and quietly dreading. The bone reinforcement and cardiac implant gave him advantages in certain areas. Sustained exertion tolerance was significantly higher than his baseline physiology would have predicted, and recovery time after high-intensity effort was shorter. But the implant made certain medical monitoring protocols unreliable, and the assessors were careful to flag every result with a notation about the non-standard physiological baseline. He was aware during these sessions of being watched more closely than the others. Not suspiciously. Scientifically. Commander Tove's team was building a picture of what he was capable of, and they were doing it carefully because they did not have a ready reference to work from. He found this less uncomfortable than he would have expected. There was something clarifying about being assessed honestly, without the pretense that he fit a standard mold. The human woman, he had learned her name was Sergeant Rhett Una Castellano, formerly of the Earth Unified Defense Corps, caught up with him during an outdoor exercise period in Week 4. They walked a circuit of the facility's external observation ring, and she was quiet for most of it before she said, "The scanner flagged you for a red band alert." "Yes. Mine was a yellow band. Behavioral flags from a psych assessment." Pause. "I looked up what red band means. It's supposed to indicate a potential security threat. It also indicates unknown quantity," Reyes said. "They're different classifications." "Is that what they told you?" "That's what I asked." Castellano was quiet again. They walked a full circuit before she spoke. "You knew it would flag you." "I knew there was a good chance." "And you came anyway." "The alternative was not coming," Reyes said. "That seemed worse." She thought about this. What happened out there? Past the frontier? It was a direct question and he appreciated that. He had spent a long time in environments where directness was either a luxury or a liability, and the ability to be straightforward with people who could handle it felt valuable in a way that was hard to articulate. 3 years of survey work, he said. We found things the coalition doesn't officially know about yet. Environmental hazards. Biological anomalies. Evidence of pre-coalition habitation in areas that aren't supposed to have been inhabited. He paused. The exposure incident was one of the biological anomalies. We didn't know what it was. We made the wrong call about containment. People died. 2 of my team. 3 more were evacuated in critical condition. I was the least affected. He stopped walking for a moment, looking out through the observation window at the planet below, the curved blue-green of Kepler 442b hanging in space with the patient permanence of things that had been there long before any of them and would be there long after. The least affected still takes 2 years to put back together. Castellano stood beside him at the window. And you came here. I came here. Why the Coalition Defense Initiative specifically? Why not Earth Defense Corps, or a survey continuation program? Reyes looked at the planet. Because what I found out there is going to matter eventually. When it does, it would be better to have people who understand it inside the Coalition's operational structure than outside it. Pause. That's the practical answer. What's the other answer? He was quiet for a moment. I need to be useful. And this is where useful is. It was the same answer he had given Desic Pow in the intake room, reduced to its essential components. He had said it often enough now to enough different people, that he had stopped wondering whether it was a complete explanation or just the truest one he had access to. Castellano nodded once. Okay, she said, which was not agreement exactly, but the kind of acknowledgement that meant she had heard him and found nothing in it to argue with. They finished the circuit and went back inside. The final assessments concluded on a Tuesday. Reyes did not know the results immediately. Track 7's evaluation protocol required a 2-day review period before any outcomes were communicated to recruits. He spent those 2 days in the routine of the facility: meals in the anteroom, reading in his quarters, one more circuit of the observation ring with Castellano, who was characteristically quiet and characteristically present in the way he had come to appreciate. On the 3rd day, Commander Resh Tov called each recruit in individually. Reyes's meeting was scheduled for 1400. He arrived at 1358. Tov's office was small and orderly, with a view of the station's exterior docking array rather than the planet below. The commander was seated at his desk and indicated the chair across from him without preamble. "Your assessment results," Tov said, "have been transmitted to GCDI Senior Command, per the protocol established for your case at the beginning of the review period." "I remember," Reyes said. "They have responded with a formal program assignment." Tov set his datapad on the desk between them and turned it so Reyes could see the screen. "You are being assigned to the GCDI's Frontier Intelligence and Reconnaissance Division, specifically to the newly established Anomalous Phenomena Assessment Unit. The unit is small, currently 8 personnel, expanding to 15. Its mandate is to investigate, document, and develop operational responses to biological, environmental, and structural anomalies encountered in frontier and deep survey zones." Reyes read the assignment summary twice. "They're building a unit around what I found," he said. "They are building a unit that your findings help justify," Tov said carefully. "The survey program data you brought in, the incident report, the documentation of the pre-coalition habitation evidence, the biological anomaly records, was reviewed by Senior Command during your assessment period. It has been determined that these phenomena require a dedicated investigative capacity within the GCDI's operational structure. And they want me in it. They want you to help lead it. Specifically, to serve as the unit's primary field assessment specialist, with a provisional rank of senior specialist, which is the GCDI equivalent of a mid-grade officer commission. Pause. The rank comes with full medical re-evaluation rights, which the Medical Assessment Division believes will be important given the long-term uncertainties around your physiological profile." Reyes was quiet. He was aware of a feeling that was not quite surprise. He had wondered, in the 4 days of his review and the 6 weeks of his assessment, whether the direction of all this scrutiny was eventually going to point somewhere, but it was something. The particular weight of a thing becoming real. "The scanner flagged me," he said. "Yes. And the flag led to this." "Indirectly. The flag led to extended review. The review led to SARO evaluation. The SARO evaluation led to Track 7. Track 7 produced an assessment that confirmed what the documentation suggested." Tov folded his hands on the desk. The scanner was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It identified a profile that did not match the established baseline. What the baseline was not equipped to recognize was that a sufficiently unusual profile is not automatically a liability. "The machine didn't know what I was," Reyes said. "The machine knew you were different. It did not know what kind of different." Tov allowed a brief pause. "That distinction matters. It is also the reason the GCDI is now building a unit dedicated to exactly the kind of phenomena that made you different in the first place." Reyes looked at the assignment summary on the datapad. At the unit name. At the mandate. He had spent 3 years past the frontier, in places where the maps ran out and the protocols were guesses and the things you found did not always have names yet. He had spent 2 years being put back together. He had spent the months before coming here wondering whether the thing he had become after all of that was something a structured institution could make use of, or whether the gap between what he was and what the baseline expected was simply too wide. The scanner had confirmed the gap. The institution had looked at the gap and decided it was useful. He accepted the assignment. The meeting with Commander Tov lasted another 35 minutes, covering administrative details, timeline, and logistics for the Uphouse formation. Reyes took notes on his comm unit with the focused attention he had brought to everything in the past 6 weeks. When it was over, he stood and shook Tov's hand, a human custom that the commander extended without being asked, which Reyes noticed and did not comment on. He walked back through the facility's corridors toward the Track 7 anteroom, where he knew Castellano would probably be waiting to hear how it had gone. He passed the holding bay on the way. Through the long observation window, he could see the morning intake queue, a new cohort, fresh from transport, shuffling toward the scanner column in the patient procession of people who had not yet become what they were going to be. The scanner stood in the center of the room, matte gray and quiet, the blue sweep of its light passing over each recruit in turn. Tom. Green light. File transferred. Chum. Green light. File transferred. You watched for a moment. The machine processed 3 more recruits without incident, each scan lasting less than 2 seconds, each file transferred cleanly and without alarm. It was a good machine. It did exactly what it had been built to do. Its baseline was carefully constructed, its tolerances precise, its alert thresholds calibrated to years of accumulated data about what recruits were supposed to look like. It was just that the database had gaps. Every database did. Every baseline assumed that the most important things had already been cataloged, that the relevant range of what a person could be had already been mapped and measured and filed. It was a reasonable assumption as assumptions went. It was mostly right. But the frontier was still out there, past the edge of the maps, full of things that had not been cataloged yet. And the people who came back from it came back carrying those things in ways that did not always register cleanly on instruments designed for a narrower world. The scanner had screamed because it had found something it did not have a name for. The institution had taken 6 weeks and several departments to arrive at a name. Reyes turned away from the window and walked on toward the anteroom. Behind him, in the holding bay, the machine went on doing its work. Chum. Green light. File transferred. Quiet and efficient and very nearly correct.